Good morning. It's Rochester Today, Friday the 13th edition. I guess I could not have a more fitting guest.
Yeah.
Steve Lange from Rochester Magazine.
Spookiest possible guest.
Yeah, I thought it was just bad luck.
Well, how's it going?
Good, Steve. Good. Glad to have you back on. Always good to talk with you.
Yeah, it was good seeing you.
So I see the cover of the magazine, 100 Days of Winter.
Yeah, and a cool piece of art from Troy Becker, a artist here at Forum Communications who owns the Post Bulletin, and trying to combine a couple different elements. So he took the marquee from the Chateau Theater and then the ice sculptures from Social Ice and kind of turned those into one image for the cover. And I got a lot of cool response from that. And it was cool to take a couple recognizable, Rochester locations.
So obviously this is a calendar of events that take place during the winter months. When did it start? Did it start early enough to include the first Rochester Dazzle Parade?
Yes. So in fact, I'm trying to think. I think that was, because what day was that? That was
the previous Saturday.
I know we had it in somewhere. Yeah, Downtown Dazzle. So yes, this calendar starts on December 1 and it goes through 100 days of winter. So it takes us through March 10th or so, 9th or 10th. So the 7th had the Downtown Dazzle listed, and there's a little write-up on each of the 100 events. And what's today? Friday the 13th. So today's part 2 of the holiday gift fair at the Mayo Civic Center. Tomorrow, and actually I'm glad we're talking today because I kind of forgot about this and want to go. Tomorrow is the Tuba Christmas at Bethel Lutheran Church. They have 50 plus tubas that show up for this thing. It's supposed to be really cool. And my daughter, who has gone to one, was like, you've got to go to this. They're awesome. So it's people of all tuba playing abilities who meet at Bethel tomorrow night. And they'll be playing songs of the season on the tuba. And I guess it's just really a cool event to be part of.
I can't get my mind around oompa.
My daughter plays the tuba. My daughter, she hurt her shoulder, so she's not able to play this year, but she's played the tuba for Mayo High School for the last few years. And, it doesn't feel like an instrument that can stand alone with, even with 49 other tubas playing Christmas music. But the people who've been to this, and this is kind of I don't really want to call it a touring event, but it's an event that's played or put together all over the country where they have these tuba Christmas shows, and they encourage anyone who can play at all to show up. So if you tell them in advance, they send you the music, you can practice, and then show up. So I'm glad we were talking about this because now I can remember to try to get to the Tuba Christmas tomorrow at Bethel Lutheran Church.
I saw you have a little piece about that in this month's magazine, and that there are some communities where it's 500 or more tubas.
I was looking at photos and we were trying to find the picture to represent this Tuba Christmas here, and it is wild because it's also, Akron, Ohio gets 500 to 600 tuba players every year for their Tuba Christmas. Rochester is expecting 50 to 70, which to me seems like a stunningly high number of tuba players in Rochester. But people, get dressed up, they decorate their tubas. I guess it's a real, it's a real event. And like I said, I'm glad we mentioned it because now I'm going to remember to go tomorrow night.
That's, okay. That's probably one of the more unusual calendar items you might have for the 100 days of Christmas, or winter, I guess.
Sunday is Choral Arts Ensemble is at Assisi Heights doing a Christmas at Assisi concert, so that's just there. Monday, get your pick taken with Santa at Apache Mall. Tuesday is catch some high school hockey with Lourdes playing Red Wing at Graham Arena. I mean, it just goes on and on. There's actually a lot. Wednesday is Judy Collins at the Civic Center, which is an awesome possibility. And then Thursday is Diamond Rio at the Civic Center. So it's a lot of really very specific to the date and locality events. So very Rochester specific for the most part.
Are these submitted to you, or do you research it and hunt for things?
It is a huge undertaking, and actually I hire someone to help, and the person I hire is my daughter Hadley, because she had done this kind of thing at college when she was there. So she compiles it all into a giant spreadsheet, which is color-coded based on location, based on the type of event, whether it's music or sports or whatever else. And then as I get stuff, I pass it along, and she and I and others spend a lot of time just finding events and moving them to this calendar. So yeah, we always encourage people to send us events for the magazine regardless, because we run this calendar every month. And then this one is the 100 days. And obviously 100 days of winter is a lot tougher than our 100 days of summer calendar.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. So is this Rochester specific or southeastern Minnesota?
Southeastern Minnesota, we certainly have things from, in fact, a lot of these are Rochester, but we certainly have things from Treasure Island, from Chatfield Center for the Arts. But no, I'm looking through this, and boy, there's Ironwood Springs for the sleigh ride. There's the Rochester Pops Orchestra with Tom Overly and Caroline Wara on Sunday the 22nd. Goonies Comedy Club on the 27th, the Polar Run at Charlie's Pub on the 28th. So no, there's a lot of very local specific events, but no, there are times we can't find something Rochester specific necessarily, but boy, you look through this and it's like you and I have talked about a lot. There's never nothing to do. So
that's
people
true.
Put some effort into it. You can find something to do any night in this area.
All right, 100 Days of Winter. It's the cover story, Rochester Magazine, but there's a lot more inside. And we'll talk about some of it when we return with Steve Lange from Rochester Magazine. I'm Andy Brownell on News Talk 1340, KROC AM, and at 96.
Paul Trombley.
Welcome back. Rochester Today, Friday the 13th. I'm Andy Brownell with Steve Lange, Rochester Magazine. And once again, you found a great story on a person who made a very long trip to Rochester, Minnesota. I'm always fascinated. I don't know, it's just me, that we have all these extraordinarily talented people who have made Rochester their home, who come from wherever on this globe. And this particular woman started her life in Taiwan, right?
Yeah, Ming Fen Ho was born and raised in Taiwan, actually then went to Australia to get her master's and PhD after getting a nursing degree in Taiwan, then decided she wanted to get into research, went to Australia, and then ended up in Rochester getting a job with Dr. Richard Leichenbaum, one of the great researchers here, ended up getting a job in his lab, basically. She was just kind of sat next to him when she moved here and ended up partnering with him, and today is just doing some amazing stuff. I lucked out. We got to spend a bunch of time with Ming Fen Ho, and she is just doing this amazing research to try to fight opioid and alcohol addiction. And that research includes and is centered around growing tiny human brains, the size of a pea, and then testing drugs and testing the brain's reaction to alcohol and opioids.
So did you coin the phrase mini brain?
No, that was something. So I do have to give credit to Mayo Clinic here, because they've got a really good media team over there that I'm sure you're aware of, and they'd actually reached out to me about this story. I think we've really, had the ability to do some of these bigger, longer pieces, and this was one they thought would warrant it, and they send story ideas along, and we take a look and decide to pass or catch. And this one we're glad we caught, because this one was phenomenal, and it really was something that deserved kind of a longer, bigger piece, and we got a chance to do that.
And I'll be honest, as a person who grew up watching Saturday matinees with Vincent Price, the idea of growing mini brains in a lab, sounds a little creepy at first.
It's a wild story. So what happens is patients who come in to either Mayo Clinic or Hazelton Betty Ford in the cities, which is a well-known addiction treatment facility, they agree to and volunteer to give their blood for this research. So what happens is then they are able to take, and it's way more complicated than I'm able to explain, Andy, but they're able to take their blood samples. You can turn blood samples into stem cells, which is a pretty standard, I say standard, it's a pretty standard process for
those who know how to do it.
Scientists, yeah, no, I'm not doing it in my basement or anything. But and then those stem cells can be coaxed and cajoled into certain types of cells. So in this laboratory in the Kellen building, people are making cells that are heart-based or that are skin-based. And in this case, because they're in the psychiatric part of the lab, this group, Ming-Fen Ho's team, is making mini brains, and they use these brains to test so these are brains from addicts, from people who are being treated for alcohol or opioid addiction. So they know that
So they think there's a genetic component here somehow.
Something that they realize these are people who have this problem. Let's look at the drugs, see how alcohol affects these brains, these mini brains that they grow from the people's stem cells. It sounds insane, right? But they're literally like pea-size, kind of off-white brains floating in this liquid, in this container that, every 24 hours, Ming-Fen Ho and her team, for the brains they're studying during the study period, they have to bathe and feed these things every 24 hours, which is really
it's sounding creepier and creepier the more you talk about it.
I say bathe and feed. It's really lubricate and nourish, technically, but bathe and feed sounds better. But no, so it's pretty amazing, and it's been some real, breakthrough studies of, they're the only laboratory in the world using mini brains to test for alcohol and opioid treatment response.
So I imagine the idea is, number one, learn perhaps why these people are more susceptible. And number two, what could work to counteract that susceptibility.
It's exactly it. So the first thing might be exactly what you said. They might just take these mini brains and give them some alcohol or opioids in liquid form, whatever it is, and then they actually pass those on to a team of computational scientists who then look at these mini brains to see how they have reacted. They've studied them before, and they study them after the alcohol or opioid, I don't want to call it treatment, but in this case, they're just applying alcohol or opioids to the mini brain and then seeing how they react. Is there a physical reaction that's different from people who aren't addicts, for instance? They also then can take these brains that have been given alcohol or opioids and then give them, there's like 3 main drugs to treat those issues.
Sure.
And they can give them those drugs and see how the brain on that drug or alcohol reacts to the treatment. And then, they don't know who the people are. This is not going to, the beauty of the people volunteering is it'll never probably help them. But then you can say, okay, now we know people who have this kind of brain makeup might be more receptive to this kind of drug. And that's really what they're doing here. And it seems crazy and insane, when you think about taking a bit of my blood and turning it into one of my brains. And all of it was fascinating because the brains, like they're just doing one part of the brain, the part of the brain that is affected by addiction, right? So they're not building like an entire brain. They're just building, I think it's the frontal cortex. I better look that up because I might.
No, I think you're right. I read it just recently. I think you're correct.
It's just one part of the brain. They can take different parts of the brain, then put them together into one big brain. It's not very effective. After they get bigger than pea size, they start shedding cells, and it all sounds, like you said, like science fiction. But boy, when you read others' take on what they're doing here, what Ming-Fen Ho's team is doing here, and she gives a lot of credit to her team and to Dr. Richard Weinschelbaum, who was her mentor and a guy who had really kind of pioneered this kind of research. But they're doing stuff no one else in the world is doing and getting results no one else in the world is getting.
In your article, I like the way that you broke it down into, I think, just one paragraph. This magical transformation from somebody's blood to a mini brain. But you go on to say, this takes months and months and months to actually pull this stunt off.
And not only does it take months and months, but when the researchers are growing brains for treatment, this might be a total of a 6-9 month project, right? You take one set of brains, you're going to treat them, and then they're no longer viable or whatever happens, you move on. But during that process, you really need to treat these brains every 24 hours. And no scientist in this lab wants to rely on someone else to do it, or, there's a lot of sterility, there's a lot of science involved in treating these brains, and you don't want to force someone else to, watch your pet for you, and you don't want to have the responsibility necessarily of watching someone else's pet, right? So
it still sounds creepy when you put it that way.
In the brain world, it's the same way. So Ming-Fen Ho, when she's doing a research study, she may literally be in the office every day, 7 days a week, coming in every 24 hours to bathe and feed, technically lubricate and nourish her brains, the mini brains, because she wants to watch them grow and follow them through the process, and she knows what they're doing and how they're growing. And yeah, I appreciate you saying I was able to break it down into a paragraph, because I spent a lot of time. This was hard to get your head around. I mean, and there was a lot of stuff going on, and it was really important to, to kind of consolidate it. And yes, I said that blood that they get from these patients, that blood was then converted into stem cells, cajoled into brain cells, coaxed into mini brains. The entire process takes about 5 months or so. And it's a day-by-day process of following these stem cells into brain cells into mini brains.
So did you get into the room, the lab, or did they just have photos?
We did. So they actually have, I think, I got a feeling that maybe some of the things we were looking at were more for show than the actual process, but some were actually the process. When we were there, she didn't have any brains in the pea-size yet, so they were much smaller, but we saw some other photos of the pea-size brains, and, it looks like, I don't know what, like a little piece of, brain floating in a jar. And Ming-Fen Ho has actually created a device that will be turning these things so they're not, just sitting in a jar. They're actually moving in a 3D printed contraption that she came up with, so that they're always kind of being lubricated and moved around in this nutrient liquid that they basically live inside.
So back to the Vincent Price thing. You're going in this room and all these little mini brains can somehow control you.
Yes, and you can hear them. No, you can't. I shouldn't. But it felt very much like Steve Martin, the man with two brains, when I was in there. But it's awesome, and hearing them talk about something that they're so passionate about especially something as life-changing as alcohol or opioid addiction. Yeah. And that was part of the beauty of Ming-Fen Ho's stories. She started off as a nurse in Taiwan, always had loved her interactions at their local hospital and the people there and how they treated people. And so she wanted to treat patients and became a nurse, and then realized research was really a forte for her. And when she got into research, still holds on to that nursing experience she had of working with those patients directly and working with those doctors directly. So she, in my mind and in others' minds, has the ability to translate a bigger picture, because she's not just doing the sterile research. She knows what the patients have gone through, and she knows what the doctors need to get from that patient information, and is really able to bring it all together. So just a phenomenal doctor, PhD, doing phenomenal things.
I hope the work pays off, because the disease of addiction is so devastating to the individual, but society as well. I look at all the problems that we face that are associated with it.
When I was just doing some background research on the amount of people addicted to opioids or alcohol and the number of deaths that occur from those addictions, it's a stunning, you just don't understand how deep it is, I think, until you really start to try to get your head around the numbers. And so for them, that was what they realized, is that this is something that we need to put a lot of time and effort and money into, and they have been. And it's like I said, it's research that's happening right in our backyard that's not happening anywhere else in the world.
We have to take a break for news already. Great article, though, Steve. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll return, talk more with Steve Lange from Rochester Magazine on Rochester Today in just a moment. News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.
Paul Trombley.
Good morning. Welcome back. It's Rochester Today. I'm Andy Brownell Friday the 13th on Newstalk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM. Back to the article about the mini brains. One thing I forgot to ask you about. We all see the cool building, the Kellen building. I guess, there's varying opinions about the exterior, but it certainly looks unique, whether you appreciate it or not. But you got to go inside there. Is it, I guess, as cool inside as it looks outside?
I actually felt like, and I was a little afraid, I spent too much writing about the building itself because I was really taken by, the exterior design. Actually, there has some reasoning behind that kind of skin around it. That's, it's called a scrim. It's all-weather fabric draped over the building and around those ovals, and it's designed to let in natural light, reduce energy costs. But the building itself is designed in a really cool way in that at the very center of each floor is kind of the center of the research. So at the center of each floor might be the where they store their samples, and everything kind of works out from there. So the closer to the center of the floor you are, the more research heavy your work is. So that part I thought was really cool. So as you move farther and farther out, that's where there's more meeting space, more wide open space. But as you move closer to the center of the building, that's where it happens. And so when they built the building, they took that into account, that that's how they're going to build it. So obviously the center of these labs has a lot of, it's a lot different than the outside. The things they need as far as cooling systems for these, nitrogen, liquid nitrogen tanks, et cetera. So I thought that was phenomenal that they had taken into account what the doctors and researchers wanted and built a building around that. And every floor is identical when you get like above floor 4. The first 3 floors are kind of for gathering and space and people meeting. But every research floor is the same because they know this design is effective and they could build the building in a way that kind of was, an economy of scale, right? So if the whole center of the building is based on having these liquid nitrogen tanks or whatever else they need, I found the building pretty amazing. As far as looks go inside, yeah, it's beautiful, but there was nothing. The stunning part to me was the, kind of workflow setup.
Yeah, it's more utilitarian when you're inside.
I thought it was awesome.
And it makes sense from an engineering standpoint. If you're going to have that expensive infrastructure, you'd want it centrally located.
And the fact that they'd reached, that they really had a lot of dealings with Mayo docs and researchers on the front end to design a building around their needs, which, I think sounds like a no-brainer, but I'm guessing it doesn't happen all the time.
All right. Mayo related as well. It's a short piece, but it's so cool. Just everything about it is cool. A story about Danny Kaye and a visit to Rochester. And I guess my first question to you is, did you just happen upon this? Or how did you get it? I mean, I imagine it was in the Post-Bulletin archives.
I've had this in my hopper for years, literally for like 15 years. I knew that this happened. I knew Danny Kaye had flown himself to Mayo when he was sick. I was reading, just pounding through stuff on for no apparent reason. I came across a New York Times obit of Danny Kaye, and I was searching for Mayo Clinic Rochester, and I came across a New York Times obit that had like one line, like he was an accomplished pilot who once flew himself to Mayo Clinic when he self-diagnosed appendicitis.
Yeah.
And so that was it. There was one line, and I was like, oh, my God. And I couldn't find anything else about it. There was just this one line in New York Times. So I knew they must have got it from the PB. So I searched, and yes, we've been moving the PB archives, and I finally ran across a story about a 1992 interview about this 1963 event. And then I was able to write this, short story. It's really all it was. It's just this Rochester retro section we do. But yeah, in 1963, Danny Kaye, who was a famous singer, actor, comedian, dancer from, 50s, 60s. He was Walter Mitty in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. He was in White Christmas. Awesome.
Oh, yeah, Danny Kaye.
Love that. But we're of a certain age, Andy. We're saying Danny Kaye means something. I mean, there's other people who are not going to look in. But in 1963, he was piloting his own plane from L.A. to Washington, D.C. He was a big pilot. and flying over Kansas, and then I found a story in the Washington Post who said he felt a pain in his side, correctly diagnosed it as appendicitis, and changed his course for Rochester. Landed at the Rochester airport, immediately taken to the clinic, and they operated on him that night, and probably saved his own life. And there was a great bit about him being here, and people, some of the reporters who were trying to find him and interview him here were really rebuffed by him and found him, he was hanging up on people, he wouldn't take calls. But then there were stories about him going to the clinic and serenading kids in the hospital. So, just one of those little moments that kind of bring together a lot of different things, including Mayo's influence over the years.
Well, so many aspects of the story I love. Number one, he's an accomplished pilot after, having this entertainment stardom, find himself, and self-educated position apparently before the time of Google. You get a pain in your side. What do? You Google it, right?
Yeah, right. Yes.
Danny Kaye had to do a lot more reading, I imagine, to understand for himself that as he's flying over the country that, this feels like appendicitis. I think I'll go to Rochester because they know me there, and turn the plane around and go to Rochester and get a surgery.
He was a medical buff, and like you said, he was an accomplished pilot. He flew a lot of pretty heavy-duty planes for that era and owned a lot of planes. And, those two things just came together in that December day of 1963 when he happened to be flying came up with his own can't think of the word.
He had the connections, too, because he was a regular visitor to Rochester. So, I'll just veer over to Minnesota to get this taken care of. No problem.
Yeah, self-diagnosed his own appendicitis and flew to the Rochester airport, got taken to the clinic, and got operated on that night. And just a cool little tidbit that, like I said, I've been waiting forever to get the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would have said.
And for my own, selfish reasons, I enjoyed your reference to Ken McCracken because at the very beginning of my career in this business, 40-some years ago, I briefly worked along with him when he was covering the law enforcement beats for the Post-Bulletin. So Ken would be at what we used to call the cop shop all the time to get the morning briefing. And then Jan Gregerson, who was there for many, many, many years, took over after Ken. And I think he's in Canada, the last I heard, or maybe he's passed away.
He was a long-time PB reporter. I never met him. I was there when Jan Gregerson was there. But, no, Ken McCracken was a long-time stalwart for the Post-Bulletin. Yeah, he talked about Danny Kaye hanging up on him when he tried to call him for the interview. So he was a little miffed, but then he heard the cool stories about other things Danny Kaye was doing. So,
and Ken was, if you think of the old time movies, A Newspaper Man, that was him.
Okay, yeah. No, I've heard a lot of people really had a lot of respect for him here and the work he did.
All right. I know what we got to talk about before we take a break. Your 10 or so questions. Former head of Olmsted Medical Center, right?
Yeah, so from one hospital to another. But Larry Pearson is an MD. He was the former Olmsted Medical Director from 1999 to 2002. He's an artist. In fact, he drew his own picture. Retired psychiatrist, drew his own picture of himself talking to himself on the couch as if it's a psychiatrist talking to a patient. But we got to use a piece of his own art for the illustration for 10 questions. But yeah, just a cool guy. I don't even know. Where I ran across him was actually we were at SEMVA. And I saw some art that I liked, and he happened to be the guy who was working at SEMVA that day. A lot of the artists take turns volunteering to work at SEMVA, which is worth a stop if you ever get in there.
It is. It's a cool place.
And they're in a new location, or relatively new. It's cool. So it's the Southeastern Minnesota Visual Artists, right? Is that what it is?
I think that's correct, yeah.
So
whatever type of drawing or etching or color, they've got it.
Go there for gifts for the holidays. They had really cool cribbage boards that people had made by hand. They have antlers that have been turned into stuff. There's all kinds of art as well that you can purchase there. That's what they do, is they're kind of a collective that sells art from the local scene. But anyway, so I was in there and I saw his art and liked the stuff and talked to him a little bit and got his card, and we ended up meeting at Crooked Pint. Is that what the place is called now?
The one along South Broadway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
or
Crooked
Goonies.
Pint had a cool, exactly. Had a cool meal there and got to have lunch with him, and just an unbelievable history for a guy who'd spent, 4 years in the psychiatry business. Obviously he's going to have all kinds of stories, some of which he couldn't tell, but, just talked about, he worked everywhere. He worked at FMC, he worked at the State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, and just loved what he did and loved interacting with patients and trying to help them, get back on the right track or work through issues or whatever their issues were.
Probably my favorite response to one of your questions was that with his kids and grandkids, he doesn't bother passing along his wisdom because they just ignore him. He's like, I had this view of retirement that my grandchildren would sit around and want to hear my pearls of wisdom, and I realized they don't. Yeah. So he's like, it was kind of one of those, I've been doing this a long time. I'm a, psychiatrist. I deal with people. He's like, I thought I was going to sit around in retirement and just going to dole out pieces of advice for people, and they'd all, linger around me. But it was really funny because he said, I just realized they don't, and that's fine. So I just took up art instead.
Yeah, he did. So he'd always done art. In fact, he'd done some covers for some different journals, whatever they put out at OMC. And then after he retired from OMC and from psychiatry overall, he got back into art, and now he's available to sell you his stuff at SEMVA.
So after having a chat with you, he didn't recommend, therapy or institutionalization or anything?
It was funny because I asked him that, and he said, when I'm on the clock, I'm on the clock. When I'm off the clock, I'm off the clock. It's just too much to try to, be psychoanalyzing. Because I asked him, are you going to say, this guy, me, has a bunch of issues that we should probably talk about when we're done with the interview? And he said, no. He said, I don't work if the meter's not running. And that's kind of been his take. And he said that's served him really well, and his family's always really appreciated it, where he's not, not psychoanalyzing every friend you bring over the house.
And besides, you couldn't afford him.
Yeah, exactly right. So, super fun interview. A lot of interesting tidbits from 40 years of psychiatry, and from, basically 40 years as an artist as well. So some really cool stuff. And I love the fact that he got a chance to use his own drawing of himself as the art for the 10 questions.
Yeah, I liked his drawing. Nice.
Yeah, very cool.
Okay, we got to take a break. Steve Lange with Rochester Magazine with us. I'm Andy Brownell. When we return, we'll talk about the highly competitive Lange household when it comes to Christmas gifts. My goodness. Back in a moment, News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.
Paul Trombley.
News Talk 1340 KROC AM 96.9 FM. I'm Andy Brownell. Rochester today with Steve Lange with Rochester Magazine. And you wrote in your Oddchester column about your new Christmas tradition. And you had talked in the past about the dollar store thing, which I thought was a pretty cool idea, until you wrote in this column that for the last 2 years, the kids, this seems a little bit passive aggressive to me, purchased you pregnancy tests?
So for years we've gone to the dollar store, right? It started off a long time ago. My oldest daughter was 4 or so and wanted to go to the dollar store. We let her pick out gifts for everyone, and she agonized for, an hour to pick out, a foam finger or, season 1 of Mr. Belvedere or whatever. So, but it was adorable, right? And then as the kids got older, it became less and less adorable. And by a few years ago, with the kids all either grown or well into their teens, they were buying me, especially, gag gifts every time. So yes, I got pregnancy tests from the dollar store, like any sort of test they get.
Wow.
I think they might even have like drug tests at the dollar store. So anyway, at some point we were like, okay, we got to move on to something else. This used to be adorable when the kids would agonize over buying Lindy a candle or a a differently scented candle. I mean, so about 5 years ago, we decided we'd go to a Secret Santa. We'd only draw one name. You'd pick pick someone in the family. You could only spend at that time $10. And that first year, my daughter Hadley had picked my wife, we would find out later, and had spent an inordinate amount of time making this beautiful family tree. She'd bought with her $10 a frame at the Goodwill and one of those big family tree templates. It's beautiful little lettering. You can buy those things cheap. And she got a free, short term, the test run with Ancestry.com, and spent that time to track down my wife's family tree. And it was this beautiful gift. Hadley's the first one to give her a gift this first year of the Secret Santa. And it's beautiful. I mean, my wife is crying because it's clearly she spent so much time on it. And the rest of us are kind of crying because we realize, oh my God, we have not done anything like this. And again, in my defense, I had been getting pregnancy tests for my Christmas gifts for my kids, so I really didn't know we'd gone to this level. That year, I think I literally bought my son a bunch of just peanut butter candy, which he loves, from Quick Trip, like a bunch of different things. And my son had given me a bunch of coins wrapped up in pieces of paper because he clearly had forgotten we were even doing this, and that's what he gave me, $5, $10 worth of coins, whatever it was.
And Hadley's got this magnificent display.
And so since that moment, we have all completely upped our Secret Santa game, and we put a lot of time and effort into it. Hadley made me a book one year when she had me. I used to tell Henry this story, bedtime story called Little Henry, Big Hank, and she had remembered a bunch of that, and I had some notes for it, and she turned it into a children's book. She bought a blank book and did the drawings and, hand lettered the whole story. It's awesome. So we've gone crazy. The kids have hand embroidered things. They've screened T-shirts. They've learned to knit to make things. I learned wasn't cooking. I made Buckeyes, those peanut butter fudge balls one year for Henry. Spent hours at the library turning our videotapes into DVDs. So we've done a ton of that.
I was going to ask you about that. Is that something you got to reserve? You got to wait in line, or because that's time consuming as all get out.
It's time consuming as all get out, and you better make sure that it's working, because for a time it wasn't working. So you can actually take the videotapes, different formats, and turn them onto DVDs at the library. You better call and make sure, because there was a time when it wasn't working. There was a time where they weren't doing it. But luckily I kind of lucked into a time where it was working and they were doing it. But it was awesome. So I turned all of our family VHS, it wasn't even VHS, it was like 16 or 8 millimeter, whatever those things were.
The smaller cassettes, yeah.
Smaller cassettes, and turned them into DVDs. When I had Lindy one year, so I took all of that and burned it on a DVD, so we were saving it, and it was, my Christmas gift that year. It was awesome. And it's awesome that we don't spend that much money. I think we've upped it to like $20 now. But last year I had Emma, my youngest daughter, and she was going to Belgium for the Rotary Youth Exchange for her junior year of high school. And so I spent forever putting together one of those, flip calendars. So I got 365 days I'd reached out to family members and friends, and they'd sent me little poems or pictures or whatever, and I laid this whole thing out. 365 of these pages, had to hand punch each one with 3 holes. So, 1,095 holes I had to hand punch, and I made this beautiful flip calendar. And there's no official judging, but I clearly won last year's Secret Santa.
So it's a traveling trophy is what you're saying.
In our minds, my wife would say we don't compete, but clearly the rest of the family is always kind of, as a secret nod, we know who has won. So I finally won Secret Santa last year. I will not match that ever again, but it's just been one of those cool traditions where, my wife buys the kids gifts as well, but then we also do this thing so the kids don't all buy each other things. They only buy one gift. And, and we try to put a bunch of time into it. And sometimes we do and sometimes we don't, but it's always very thoughtful, because we want year one to be repeated where we realized we had really dropped the ball on a Secret Santa gift. So,
except for the daughter, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a cool tradition. And like I said, we put a bunch of time. We draw literally like the day after Christmas for the next year.
Oh, you give yourself a whole year to work on it. Okay.
Yeah. So, so if you haven't done it, you're remiss because you've had, 364 days to do it.
Awesome. I love it. That's a funny story, and I like the idea as well. So I guess we better run. You have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, Steve. Thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Have a good time.
All right, he's Steve Lange, and we'll talk again next year on Rochester Today at News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.